Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Generations United's webinar on Grandfamilies called Loyalty, Legacy, and Choices, Constructive Conversations about Our Children's Parents. I want to introduce the moderators for today. One is myself. I'm Sherry Steinig. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at Generations United. Also joining me is Leah Bradley, who is a Program Specialist here at Generations United. So if you're not familiar with our work, Generations United works to improve the lives of children, youth, and older people through intergenerational practice and public policies. We share resources and connect practitioners around the United States and the world, and one of the ways that we do that is through our website, which you'll see in a second. It's www.gu.org, e-newsletters, our conference, and these webinars. This is the sixth and final webinar in our current webinar series on intergenerational issues, made possible through support from MetLife Foundation. We will be starting up again our webinar series this fall, so please watch our calendar on our website or our e-newsletters for more information on upcoming opportunities. Before I go on, I want to go through a couple of housekeeping items and make sure that everyone has downloaded our the handout for today's presentation. The link is here, and I can also just walk real through quickly if you want to find out how to get the link on our website. If you go to www.gu.org, under the Resources tab, there is one called Trainings. If you click on Trainings, you'll learn about our webinars. Here's where their information is, and all the presentation and recordings from the webinars are archived on the website by clicking here. You'll see at the top of your screen right here is this webinar. The presentation handout is a Microsoft Word document, a download that you can just click on, download it. This is also where we will put an archived recording of this presentation, and any PowerPoint slides or other materials will be available there. So let me get back to the right screen. A couple other housekeeping items is that there are two ways that you can listen in on this webinar. One is through your mic and speakers, and the other on your computer, and the other through the telephone. So if you're having any difficulties hearing, you may want to try the other option. Sometimes you cannot hear through the mic and speakers, and it's better just to dial in through the audio option. We will be responding to and have time for your questions and comments, so please just send them using the question or chat function at any time. The questions will come to me and Leah and Kim, our presenter, and we'll be sure to ask them and respond to them at the appropriate time. And then finally, please just take a couple minutes when the webinar is over to respond to a short survey that we have. We really rely on your feedback and comments to plan any future webinars. All right, now I'm going to introduce today's presenter and turn it over to her. So we're so thrilled that Dr. Kim Sumner-Mayer is joining us today. Kim is a senior advisor at Phoenix House's Center on Addiction and the Family, also known as COAF in New York City. At COAF, she develops programs and professional training to help those in addiction recovery repair damaged family relationships and to help family members cope with a loved one's addiction. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and before joining COAF, she worked as a clinician specializing in therapy with traumatized children and families in the child welfare system. Kim is a trainer for the National Drug Court Institute, the Federal Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, and numerous family court, child welfare, and social service agencies. She has served on the faculty of Syracuse University and on the board of directors of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, and she has appeared on CSAT's cable television show, Road to Recovery. She publishes and trains in the areas of substance abuse recovery and family reunification, parenting education, cross-systems collaboration, kinship care, and family therapy with the child welfare population. Kim has been a longtime partner and friend to us at Generations United, and we're so pleased that she's agreed to participate in this webinar today to share her expertise and her experiences. So I am going to turn this over to Kim.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm very thrilled that GU asked me to do this. As Sherry mentioned, I've been a long-time partner and supporter with GU, and it's been a wonderful experience for me. And met many of you at conferences. And I first presented this workshop at a GU conference, and then again was thrilled that they asked me to do it in webinar format for today. So without further ado, let's get to our topic, which is loyalty, legacy, and choices, constructive conversations about children's parents. And I wanted to start by saying that in my time as a clinician, I have often cringed at things that I've heard have happened to clients or things that I hear my clients say sometimes. And one of the things that consistently makes me cringe is when I hear caregivers say, "You're nothing like your father or mother," or when the child themselves says this, or "You're just exactly like them." And the reasons why that makes me cringe is because I worked for many years at a therapeutic foster care agency, and I saw firsthand how much grief and loss and unacknowledged loyalty issues the children were struggling with. And to my eyes, trained as a family therapist, it was screaming out, begging to be identified as loyalty conflicts. But the child welfare...
Before you go on, this is Leah. We're not seeing your PowerPoint.
You aren't? Okay. Let me go back. Show my screen. Okay. All right. Now are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so I saw this stuff begging to be identified as family conflicts, as loyalty conflicts, but often the child welfare system didn't respond as such, and the children received very little help to navigate their emotions about separation from their families or about termination of parental rights, which happened frequently with that population. Then I came to work at COAF, and I saw the same phenomenon from different perspectives. I saw it from caregivers and parents' angles as well. And I work with a lot of parents who are in the addiction recovery process. Many of them want desperately to be better parents, and they're eager to learn how to do that. But in the beginning of their recovery process, they have a very limited ability to understand how they've affected their children. Usually, as they progress in treatment, they become better able to appreciate it and to act to, remediate it. And I've witnessed these parents' pain. Their desire to be a positive force in their children's lives is real, and it's honorable, and it needs to be nurtured more. And then through COAF's work in the kinship field, I've seen how much pain unresolved loyalty issues cause in kinship families. So when I hear a grandparent say, "You're just like your mother," or "You're nothing at all like your father," or worse yet, when they don't speak about the children's parents at all, I cringe because children have to navigate their attachments and their loyalty with their parents regardless of the role that the parent plays in their lives, and it's on us to help them do that. Kids need to sort out their allegiances and their alliances. They need to unpack their feelings and thoughts so that they'll be free to write their own script instead of playing out an intergenerational family drama like a puppet. These children also grow up to become parents themselves, and then they have to navigate attachment and loyalty issues with their own children. So it's extremely important to help them work through attachment and loyalty issues with their parents. That's why I created this workshop. So now what I'd like to do is just give you a brief overview of where we're going to go in the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to start out talking about the nature and nurture of loyalty. Where does it come from? And then we're going to look at caregivers' roles as stewards of the parent-child relationship. Next, we're going to look at a set of interventions that will be very helpful for caregivers to, conversations really, I should call them, not so much interventions. They are interventions, but they're in the form of conversations that we want caregivers to be having with the children in their care. And those conversations have to do with identity, loyalty, and legacy. So that's what we'd like them to be doing. The next part of the workshop is going to focus on how we help them, how we get them to a place where we can coach them to have those conversations. And that's called the VCR model when you of asking for a behavioral change. And VCR is kind of outdated now that we have DVDs and Blu-rays and all kinds of other digital players. I need to get a new acronym. but VCR stands for Validate, Challenge, and Request. So we're going to spend some time looking at how you can use the VCR model to help caregivers get to a place where they can engage in the kind of identity and loyalty and legacy conversations we want them to be having with the children. Okay? So let's start out by looking at what loyalty is. And I like to think of loyalty as an invisible wand. Okay? And so usually when I use the term invisible wand, that engenders lots of responses from people. Some of the most typical ones are a wand. That sounds like it's magic, right? And powerful and unseen. And I think that loyalty is all of those things. It's a force that often is not recognized or not immediately recognizable. It doesn't just jump right out and say, I'm loyalty and this is what's going on here. But it's there in the background working all the time, exerting a powerful influence on what children and parents do. So let's take a minute to look at what loyalty is, where it comes from. There's both nature and nurture to it. The nature piece has to do with attachment. Loyalty fundamentally comes from attachment, which is hardwired in us human beings. We cannot survive without it. We need it. Our brains and our hormones are actually organized around our attachment experiences. So early attachment heavily influences how our brain cells organize themselves and fire together. It has a very strong emphasis, a heavy influence on hormones that course through our bodies. And really it's a biological phenomenon. So it's built into our survival. Okay? It's the most fundamental human survival strategy. And so it's not likely to be extinguished easily, nor should it be. It's a fact of our human existence. Okay? In addition to being hardwired via attachment, loyalty is also linked to learning from important adults. Okay? Children model themselves on adult behavior, and we know that this is a primary teaching method and a primary motivator of child behavior. Okay? So in cases where children have lived with parents for some portion of their lives, of course, you know, that was a powerful shaping experience for them. But loyalty and attachment can occur even in the absence of that physical relationship with a parent. Okay? So even with poor care or a weak or disrupted attachment, loyalty tends to persist. And in fact, it's often strengthened by attempts to break it. And so it may be even stronger in a parent's absence. Okay? My clinical experience tells me that when children don't have contact with their parents, their fantasies about their parents paint their parents in, in all sorts of different lights, and often in a rosier light than the reality of the parent's behavior would merit. Okay, so, and finally, and very importantly, attachment and loyalty are very intimately linked with children's self-concept and with self-esteem. Self-concept has to do with the question of who am I, and self-esteem has to do with how do I feel about myself. And both of those things are critically important for healthy development in children. And I would like to just take a few minutes to give you a kind of a profile of a child I worked with who was struggling very strongly with loyalty issues. And for the purposes of confidentiality, we're going to call her Meghan. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Meghan's story, really just to highlight how loyalty issues were playing in and the ways in which the loyalty issues were an invisible wand. So Meghan had parents who abused both cocaine and alcohol. Her parents also frequently fought with each other, and the fights became violent. Meghan's history was that she pretty consistently would get in between her parents physically when they would fight. And so she sometimes suffered the brunt of her father's violence. He did physically abuse 2 out of the 3 children. She had 2 younger siblings. And the parents had also abandoned the children for periods of time related to their drug use. So there would be periods of time when she would, at age 8, would be the one who was, taking care of the kids in the morning and trying to get her younger brother up and ready for school, and so all the attachment stuff that goes along with that. At the time that I met her, Meghan had multiple placements with both relatives and with non-relatives. Her first placement was with a maternal aunt, and there was a great deal of conflict between her aunt and her mother, the sisters, and also very disruptive contact between Meghan and her parents, and that led the aunt to say she can't do this anymore, it's too stressful. It was really stressing out the aunt in her marriage and her own parenting relationship, and so Meghan had to go. She went from there to her paternal grandmother's home, and really the same story unfolded, that there was a lot of conflict between the paternal grandmother and her parents. She was constantly seeking contact with her parents, and that contact was very disruptive. And the paternal grandmother also ended up saying, I can't take this, she has to go. So she ended up in foster care, and then she went through multiple foster placements before she landed at the agency where I worked in the therapeutic foster care program. She was the eldest of 3 children. She was 11 when I met her. And her 2 younger siblings were living in 2 different placements. So she and her brothers were split up, and she had very little contact with them that was safe and sanctioned by the court and the family. Okay, so Meghan was a kid who engaged in lots of behavior that drove the adults around her absolutely crazy, made them fearful, and led them to tighten the screws on her and clamp down even further. So one of the things that she was doing a lot of when I first met her was doing what the school and the CPS worker were labeling runaway behavior, meaning that she would leave school grounds without permission, and she would go, almost always she would either go to her grandmother's house or to her parents' home. Okay, and I have quotes around the word runaway because it seems to me that running away is what you do when you're trying to get away from something, but she was always running toward something, that she had a specific goal in mind. So I questioned whether it was run away, but it was disruptive. It made people worry about her safety. She wasn't supposed to be allowed to do that. And she would consistently say that her goal was that if she could just get with her parents or her grandmother for a period of time and that everything would be fine, then the judge and the court and Child Protective would have to realize that her family was okay together and they would be allowed to come back together again. Okay? At the same time, she absolutely refused to admit or to believe that her parents abused drugs. And I think when I first met her, there was a bit of, she didn't want to believe it either. There was also a big piece of not wanting to admit it to anyone else, that her parents abused drugs. I later learned that she had witnessed a fair deal of her parents' drug use. But in the beginning, she just refused to admit it or to believe it. No, my parents don't do this. They're lying. My mother ate a poppy seed bagel, and that's why she tested positive for heroin. My father said he was close to somebody else who was smoking crack, and that's why they detected cocaine in his system. It's not true. It's a conspiracy. Okay? And the disruptive behavior in placements continued. In foster placements, she made abuse allegations against her caregivers. She was often involved with fomenting conflict with other children in the home. As she became older, there was some sexual acting out. So her behavior was just really kind of off the charts, okay? And the larger system's responses to it was to increase efforts to prove about her parents' addiction. I think her caseworker thought that if they could just prove to her that her parents had problems, she would stop defending them so much, and she would see that she really needed to accept the care and protection of the system. And of course, this resulted in greater denial and more idealization of her parents. And in addition, the system kind of, like I said before, tightened down the screws, further restricted access to her family, and reduced her visiting schedule, for example, which resulted in more runaway incidents, more attempts to communicate with her family in covert ways, where it was under the radar and no one could monitor it or help her make sense of what was being said, and of course more disruptive behavior in placements. Okay, so what were the issues that were going on here? Certainly her behavior was all over the place. When I looked at her behavior, I saw loyalty issues all over the place. This is a girl who was grieving the loss of her family and having understandable grief reactions to that, even if she wasn't safe with them, even if it wasn't the ideal family that anyone would have envisioned for her, that was what she knew. And so she was grieving the loss of family. She needed desperately to feel a positive sense of connection with this family that she now had been disconnected from. And she wasn't getting that from any of the quote-unquote helpers who she was meeting. She couldn't trust those other caregivers unless they could validate her bond with her parents and with her brothers. And so far, no one had been doing that. Okay? And she also could not tolerate or acknowledge any information about bad aspects of her parents' behavior, which to me was an immediate flag around unresolved loyalty issues. Okay? So, and as the oldest, she had played a role as the family protector. That role was no longer available to her. She had been removed from the situations that allowed her to play that role. May not have been a healthy role for her, but it was a role that gave her a sense of control and security and identity. And many of her behaviors that, acting out behaviors, I saw as an attempt to resume that role. Her trying to get back to her family so that the judge could see that they were safe together. She's trying to be the family protector again. And behavior that was intended to express loyalty ends up becoming self-defeating for her. So she's getting in all sorts of trouble at school, and then she's dealing with school problems and problems in her foster care placement. And her behavior was also preventing her from taking risks that were more appropriate for her developmentally. Like developing her skills and talents and sticking her neck out to audition for a school play, for example, which would be appropriate risk-taking versus, taking all sorts of risks that she took when she would, take off and try to get to her grandmother's house or her parents' house. Okay? All right, so if we have time at the end, I'm going to come back and tell you how I worked with Meghan. That's not actually as important as just showing you the ways in which loyalty issues that are not identified, not labeled as such, can exert a very powerful effect on the families that we work with. Okay. Now I'd like to turn our attention to caregivers as stewards of the parent-child relationship. Okay. Caregivers are in the position of mediating the parent-child relationship. And they need to help children make sense of their parents' behavior. They need to absorb and witness children's feelings about their parents' behavior and help children develop a positive self-concept. And this is a pretty tall order to ask caregivers to do on top of all the other things they have to do in order to be caregivers. So I just wanted to kind of put this job of steward in the context of all the other things caregivers are doing. And I know most of you on this call are aware of many of the things on the slide. I just wanted to put it out there that we're asking them to do an incredibly hard job on top of 15,000 other hard jobs they're already doing. The daily demands of caregiving, health issues that many elderly caregivers may be having, role strain, especially for caregivers who are still in the workforce. And we know that, the majority of caregivers now are not yet at retirement age. They are working age, and many of them are juggling multiple roles, caring for aging parents, now caring for grandchildren, working. There are marital and partner relationship strains that come along with being a kinship caregiver or grandfamily. Anger and sadness over the loss of their own, quote-unquote golden years, the plans that they had had for the years after their child-rearing years. And the difficulty of balancing loyalty to the parent and the need to protect the child. So this especially for grandparents, aunts, uncles, grandfathers. If you are the parent or the sibling of the parent whose child you're caring for, then you've got multiple loyalties to balance yourself in order to do the job of protecting the child. Okay. And I'm sorry that the format of the webinar doesn't allow me to, stop and have as much dialogue with you all. If you have questions about this material, feel free to submit them to Leah and Sherry, and we will have time at the end. I'm going to keep going. All right. Additional challenges for caregivers include the grief that they often have about the loss of the dreams they had for the parent's life. So, they didn't want things to turn out this way for the parent of the child that they're caring for. And they may feel a sense of responsibility for how things turned out for that child. Whether that's an appropriate sentiment or not, they feel that way. they also have to witness children's grief and the difficulties that the children have in the relationship with the parent, and that is extremely difficult for most caregivers. They also lack social validation about these losses. We don't have rituals in our society to mark these kinds of events in families' lives, and people who aren't living through this often don't really understand what it's like for the caregiver, so they don't get a lot of social support. Okay, and then on top of all of this, many caregivers have a great deal of fear about the children's choices in behavior. Okay, so we know that many caregivers are caring for children while the parents are doing things like serving in the military, or when there's immigration issues, the parent is not where the child is, but the parent hasn't done anything wrong or bad, or if the parent is ill. But we also know that the vast majority of kinship situations arise because of issues like parental addiction, parental incarceration. So there are problems and bad choices that parents have made that have resulted in this caregiving situation. So a caregiver has a large amount of fear about the children's choices and behavior, and hoping that the children don't repeat the parents' bad choices. Okay, so let's take a look at how when caregivers are struggling with their steward role, it plays out with parents in a number of ways. And this is not to say that this happens in every case. Many caregivers do a fantastic bang-up job of mediating the relationship between the parent and the child. But when they're struggling to do that, here's what it often looks like. Okay, there may be a resentment toward the parent. There may be an over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic where the caregiver is doing a lot and the parent is not doing enough. And the more the caregiver does, the less the parent does, or vice versa. Sometimes the caregiver cannot or will not facilitate positive contact between the parent and child, or they can't or won't coach the parent to engage in positive ways with the child. And if the caregiver has blind loyalty to the parent, then they can't make appropriate demands for the parent's behavior. So sometimes this can result in a caregiver who's turning a blind eye to a parent showing up drunk or high when they shouldn't have contact with their children, or certainly not unsupervised contact at that point. But if the caregiver is having trouble balancing their loyalty to the parent, then they're not able to adequately protect the child in a situation like that. I hope that makes sense. I know I've heard about many situations like that from the grandparent groups that I've worked with. Okay, so those are some of the ways it plays out with parents. Here are some of the ways it can play out with kids and with teens. Okay, one of the biggest ways it plays out is when a caregiver projects their fears and their perceptions of the parent onto the child. So instead of seeing the child for who that child is in all their complexity, what they see is kind of their worst fears or their most skewed perceptions of the parent. It's almost as if there's a movie screen up in front of the child, and what the caregiver sees when they look at the child is a projection of their fears and perceptions of the parent rather than actually seeing the child. Okay, and that when that happens, it's impossible for the caregiver to validate the child's feelings, because you're not seeing the child clearly. Okay, and in particular, it can be hard to validate children's grief and children's sense of betrayal by their parents. And it's very important for children to have a place where they can put both positive and negative feelings about their parents, kind of unpack them, take them out of the pack, look at them, and then take them back. And the caregiver needs to be the place for the child to do that. So if the caregiver can't validate the child's feelings or can't see it accurately, then they can't do that. It can also be very difficult for a caregiver to identify parents' positive attributes and then help to connect those with the child's developing sense of self. Like, oh, your mother has a beautiful singing voice and so do you. So I want you to get an image of in your mind of a toddler, all right? A toddler who has a cherished toy in their hands, and that cherished toy for any child in kinship care is their image of their parent, okay? So you have a toddler protecting themselves from someone's attempt to take away that cherished toy, right? If you or a friend or a sibling tries to take away that toy, you get a great big no and a big protest from them, okay? So if you try to take away the child's positive positive stuff, positive sense of who their parents are, then the child will see those feelings are forbidden. The child will defend them stubbornly or will hide those feelings. Either way, it deprives the child of a chance to unpack and examine and own both their positive and their negative feelings. Think back to how Meghan could not hear anything negative about her parents at all, and that's a reflection of this phenomenon, okay? It's also difficult to encourage appropriate risk-taking to help children develop their skills and talents when the caregiver is struggling with this, because they're so focused on keeping the children from repeating the parents' mistakes that their attention is kind of distracted from helping that child develop fully into who they can be, all right? And this sets up children up for rebellion or for depression, okay, especially if the child witnesses the caregiver arguing with the parent. All right, caregivers need to appropriately push parents sometimes, and that's okay, but trash talking the parent will backfire for sure, and that's one of the patterns that sometimes caregivers fall into. So what I've attempted to do next is kind of give profiles of when caregivers are having difficulty here. And again, I'm not suggesting that all caregivers do have difficulty, but when they do have difficulty, this is what it may look like, okay? And you have a handout in your handout packet that gives more detail about these profiles. And if you identify a pattern that you don't see reflected here, I would love to hear from you about it. Email me about it, because maybe I haven't captured all of the problematic kind of caregiver profiles, all right? But here they go. So here's one of them that I've seen, the trash talker. Okay, the trash talker is a caregiver who says a lot of negative things about the parent to the child. All right, they are angry at the parent's behavior. They're often very aware of how the parent has hurt the child. They feel very sensitive about the child's level of hurt, but they can't contain themselves, or they're choosing not to contain themselves. Okay, the trash talker cannot validate the child's grief or sadness about separation because they're so wrapped up in expressing their own. All right, so then children can't express sadness or can't express positive emotions about the parent. The child isn't free to express all of their feelings about the parent, okay? That's a trash talker. And then the next one I called the separatist. This is the caregiver who tells the child, you're nothing at all like your mother or father, okay? And this caregiver is having trouble seeing the parent's positive qualities and connecting these with the child's positive qualities. So what happens is they set up a false dichotomy for the child. The child can either be good or they can be like the parent. And so then the child has to choose. I can either be good or I can be like if I'm like my parent, that means I'm bad. If I'm good, it means I'm not loyal to my parent or I'm not like my parent, okay? So the child can't win because if they're compliant, if they're a quote-unquote good child, then they're being disloyal to their parent and they're likely to feel guilty. Right? If the child is loyal to their mother, then they equate this with bad choices and bad behaviors, which can set the child up for guilt or rebellion. Okay? All right, and then we've got the next one, the projector of negative qualities. You're just like your mother, you're just like your father. So this one is often driven by a caregiver's fear of the child repeating the parent's mistakes. The caregiver can't see how the child is unique and different from the parent. So the message to the child is that the parent is bad, and therefore they are bad, and therefore there's another false dichotomy, right? So if I identify with my parent, I'm bad, and that means I do bad things. If I do good things, then I'm rejecting my parent, okay? And children aren't necessarily going to be consciously aware of this, but this is the reality of how this stuff plays out. And in this situation, we miss opportunities to help children develop their own special talents and passions because, again, there's the projection screen up in front of the child. We're not really seeing them. All right, so the next pattern is a caregiver who may be kind of reactive or clueless about the child's loyalty. This is the one where the child idealizes the parent, refuses to believe anything negative about the parent, and this drives the caregiver absolutely nuts. You know, why is it that the parent can disappoint you time and again and you'll still defend them, and here I am, standing on my head for you and you criticize me or cut me down, okay? Or the child is engaging in behavior that the caregiver doesn't really understand is a function of loyalty, taking inappropriate risks, getting into fights, often because they're defending the parent's honor. or idealizing the parent, fantasizing about life with the parent, and the caregiver doesn't understand that that's a symptom, that's a function of the child's loyalty issues. Okay? And the last pattern is, I mentioned it before, is the caregiver who's blindly loyal to the parent. Okay, so this is about the caregiver's loyalty dilemma, not so much about the child's loyalty dilemma, all right? But this is the caregiver who allows personal and family boundaries to be pushed by the parent in ways that endanger the child. The caregiver is having trouble prioritizing, protecting the children over supporting the parent. Children learn vicariously here that the parent's needs are more important than their needs. And then they see poor boundaries modeled in the home when this is happening. And children cannot trust that the caregiver will protect them, which may replicate, copy earlier attachment trauma that they had with their parent. So those are the major problems with that. Okay, like again, if you see other patterns that I've missed, I'm very interested in hearing about them. But these are the major ones that I've kind of seen in action. And what I'd like to do now is, now we've looked at how loyalty plays out and when it's problematic, what it looks like. Now what I'd like to turn our attention to is, okay, what would we like to see happening? Okay, and that is we would like to see caregivers helping to mediate children's identity, loyalty, and legacy. And much of this material comes from Joseph Crumbly, who is one of the most authoritative and trusted sources in the kinship field. He developed these ideas about identity, loyalty, and legacy in the context of working with children with incarcerated parents. And I've sort of translated them into how you help caregivers work with children. Okay, and there are resources. There's his contact information is listed on your handouts if you'd like to follow his material more closely. He's been a big supporter of GU through the years as well. Okay, so caregivers must mediate children's identity, loyalty, and legacy. And all children have to work through identity, loyalty, and legacy issues. It's just more challenging for kids in kinship and in foster care. So what do we mean by identity, loyalty, and legacy? All right. By identity, we're talking about how the child identifies with the parent. Okay, the question is, who am I? What are my skills and talents? And again, all children have to do this. So the goal with helping children work through their identity is that they form and reform their identity in ways that lead to healthy choices for them. So the dilemma for the child is, if I'm like my mother or father and my mother or father is all bad, then I must be all bad. And then the question, I can't be good and be like my mom and dad? Okay, so this question of kind of splitting their identity. And the kind of things that we would like caregivers to be talking about with children to help them form their identity are the following types of statements, okay? These are the kind of conversations we want to encourage caregivers to have with their kids. It would go something like this. These are your mother's talents and strengths. She could have used them to become blah, 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 okay? I'll just give you a quick example. When I worked with Meghan, I met with her paternal grandmother, her father's mother. I went to the grandmother's home, and she started telling me, I was asking her about Meghan's father when he was younger, and she started telling me about what a star gymnast he had been, and she pulled out photo albums and showed me his trophies and pictures of him from gymnastics meets, and you'd never guessed it about the guy considering the way he was looking and functioning when I met him. But nobody grows up saying, I want to be a drug addict. It's always a mistake, and there's always something that happened before that. And before he was a drug addict, he was a star gymnast. And one of the things we did with Meghan was help her connect up her father's talent as a gymnast with her own extreme physical prowess and skill, and help her develop those things as a dancer. So the conversations in that case would have been, these are your dad's talents. He was an amazing gymnast. He could have used them to do X, Y, Z. And here's the next piece of it. These are the talents and strengths you have. You could use them to become X, Y, Z. Okay? Here's another derivation on that. You and your dad are very similar, but I want you to make decisions that will be different from his. Okay? Whether it's school, what you do for a living, parenthood, whatever. Okay? So all of these interventions, these conversations, honor the child's loyalty to the parent while also giving them permission to be different from their parent. All right? I hope that makes sense to you. All right. Next up, loyalty. The issue around loyalty is about demonstrating allegiance to a parent. Okay? So identity is who am I? Loyalty is what is my connection with this parent and what is my obligation to this parent? What is my allegiance to them? Okay? And as I've said, children need a positive affiliation with their parent no matter what the parent's behavior in order to feel good about themselves. So the goal when it comes to loyalty is helping children identify other ways of demonstrating loyalty besides making the same choices that landed their parents in trouble. Okay? So if we put identifying with the parent and good behavior on opposite ends of a dichotomy, children are almost always going to choose allegiance with the parent over good behavior, right? They won't understand why they're doing it. They might not be able to articulate it, but that's what's happening. So let's not put them in a position and make them choose. So these are the kinds of conversations we want caregivers to be having with children around loyalty, okay? Things like, you don't have to fight with others about your dad's innocence or guilt or addiction or incarceration, okay? You don't have to speak up or defend for your mother. She can speak up and advocate for herself as an adult. Or a caregiver can say, I can speak up and advocate for you and your parent as your grandma, okay? You don't have to make the same decision or choices your parent made to show them you're loyal to them or that you love them. Okay, so this intervention helps to reestablish appropriate boundaries and authority, which is especially important where in families where role reversal has been prevalent, and that often happens in families with an addicted parent. All right, I keep wanting to say, you know, are there questions or, you know, does anyone else want to add to that? But I'm going to keep moving on and trust that we'll be able to catch it all at the end. Continuing with loyalty interventions, here are some other kinds of STEM statements that we want caregivers to be making. That was your parent's choice. It doesn't have to be yours. Or you can make your parents feel proud of you and supported by you by things like, you know, whatever it is, not fighting, by getting an education, by not getting pregnant, by not joining a gang. And so all of these loyalty interventions work by, they separate out the parent's behavior from their being, their essence, okay, and allows children to connect with that being in essence while making different choices. All right, so we've covered identity, which has to do with who am I, and loyalty, which has to do with what is my obligation, my allegiance to you. Now we're going to talk about legacy. Legacy has to do with the future. It has to do with continuity between family patterns of the past and family patterns of the future. So legacy is about repeating parental or family patterns, behaviors, traditions, goals, values. And the goal around legacy is enhancing and redefining family traditions and values and goals and rites of passage and role models. So we don't want to erase family legacies. What we want to do is validate and confirm the good stuff about families and talk about how the future can be different, kind of a new sense of family identity as applied to the future. And the way that those conversations look are, they look like things like, these are a little bit harder for caregivers to do because these really originally were designed for parents to deliver these messages to their children. So, you know, incarcerated parents working to make changes could say, you're going to see me start, you know, going to classes, not using drugs, staying out of prison. It's harder for caregivers to say this kind of stuff because they can't make a promise about the parent's behavior, all right? So, you know, caregivers have to be careful to clarify. These are statements of intent. They're not promises. The caregiver does not have power to fulfill the parent's intentions here. And if the parent is not ready to fulfill these new expectations, then the caregiver identifies themselves as the new role model here, all right? So it's things like, you're going to see me start my own business because you and this family deserve the best from me, just like your children and family will deserve the best from you. So this statement always takes it into the future with the next generation, okay? You're going to see me around more because children need their parents, like your children will need you, okay? Violence and drugs in the home will not be tolerated if you or any other family member want to live in this home, okay? So the first two here are about, they're identifying change and new expectations and new legacies. The third one, the last one, is about new rules. either way, this is about kind of a new way of the family functioning going forward that honors the best stuff about the family while shaping also a slightly different future, okay? I plan to be around so that I can help and see you graduate from high school, and my grandchildren graduate, and my great-grandchildren graduate, and take care of their families. Okay. Another variation on this one is you're going to be the first one in our family to do blah, blah, blah. So each of these stems focuses on change. It identifies new expectations of the parent or caregiver. It identifies a new intergenerational legacy. And so these interventions promote belonging, even with somebody that the child doesn't know but feels loyalty towards, okay? It gives them a sense of history and continuity while looking to the future, all right? And it also gives children permission to be different. So those are the kinds of conversations we want caregivers to be having. And then there's one last one that Crumbly identified. There's identity, loyalty, legacy, and there's also community. And we could do a whole session on community, which basically has the goal when it comes to community is providing resources and opportunities so that children can succeed. So it's things like making sure that children are getting a basic education, skills training, occupational training, housing, healthcare, nutrition, all of those kinds of larger systems things. Now, individual caregivers may not have a lot of power over that, but what they can do is they can engage children in a dialogue about what the resources are in their community, saying things like, reality is the odds are against you. So are you going to be a victim or are you going to be a survivor, right? Or what do you need to do to beat the odds? And then you teach the odds and you identify the skills, the resources, the decisions that children need in order to beat them, which hooks back in with children's identity and with family legacies, okay? So what I'm going to do now is move on to talk about, okay, we've identified the kind of conversations that we want caregivers to be having. How do we help them get there? How do we help get them in a place where they can have these conversations, especially if they are struggling with one of the problematic caregiver profiles that we talked about before, okay? So, and I've spoken with many professionals who work with kinship caregivers, and one of the most difficult things for them to do is often confronting a caregiver about behavior that the caregiver is engaging in that they think is not helpful to the child. So what I want to do is talk about a model for asking for behavior change that is respectful and has a high probability of getting the caregiver to come around to being willing to look at their behavior when they're tired or angry or blindly loyal or just scared to open up a can of worms with the child. Okay, and that is called the VCR model. The VCR model was developed by some colleagues of mine, a mentor, Ken Hardy, and a colleague, Tracy Loslofy, at Syracuse University. And there's nothing earth-shattering about it, but it's profound in terms of its effectiveness. And when you do the steps correctly, you'll be amazed at the openness and the willingness that you're able to get from caregivers around making a change. All right. And if you want to learn more about their Ken Hardy and Tracy Loslofy's model, they first wrote it up in 2004 in a book called Teens Who Hurt, which is published by Guilford Publications. The Teens Who Hurt is a double entendre, obviously. It was written about violent teens who are also hurting, and their theory is about the ways in which their own woundedness contributes to their violence. So it's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. And so out of that came the VCR model. When asking for a behavioral change, you need to first validate the person that you're talking to, then challenge them, and then make a request. And here is how to do it, all right? And again, you have handouts that give you a little bit more detail about this. And if we were face-to-face, we would spend time practicing doing this. I'm hoping that I can give you a framework so that you can translate this over. So all come together by the end of the webinar. All right, so the first step is validating. Validation is critical. You will not be able to challenge someone unless you have first validated them. And by validate, what I mean is you need to say something to the person that lets them know that you see the genuine intention, positive emotion, a personal quality, or a desire that you want to praise them for. And it has to be genuine, and it shows them that you see the good in them and that you respect them. And it earns you the right to go to the next step. So if you don't do the V, they're not going to hear the C, okay? I could find something to validate even Osama bin Laden on. Seriously, you can find something meaningful to validate anybody on. If not, then you're not looking hard enough, okay? You have to be able to find something. It must be meaningful and genuine. It can't be trite. Preferably, the quality that you are validating, that you're recognizing about them, is linked in with or connected in some way to the very thing that you'd like them to do differently. So with a caregiver who is let's take the example of the separatist, right, that you're nothing like your mother or father. You could say something like, I see so clearly your commitment to your grandchildren and to them succeeding in life. You have been their anchor in the storm, and you have sacrificed your own comfort to provide for them. And you've protected them even when it's meant that you had to turn away your own child to do so. And I so respect your commitment to those children being successful. Okay, so I hope you can hear that there's genuineness in there. It was a specific. I followed up with detail. I didn't just give kind of a platitude. And that's going to link into the next piece, which is the challenge. When you're challenging someone, you're basically calling out, you're expressing a concern about a behavior that they're engaging in that's not aligned with other goals that they have, okay, or that you see as hurting themselves or somebody else, okay, and the challenge is gentle, but it's firm, and it's done respectfully. And preferably, you, like I said before, you use a quality that you affirmed while you're validating them, okay? So with the separatist caregiver, this might look something like this, okay? Now, I know you want her to grow up to have her own mind and to be able to make good, solid, healthy decisions. But when you say she's nothing at all like her mother, it puts her in a bind. She needs to feel good about her mother to feel good about herself. All kids need that. And no parent is all good or all bad, right? So she needs to feel good about the good things she got from her mother. So when you say you want her to be good and she's nothing like her mother, you're setting up an all or nothing for her. Either she's good and nothing like her mother, or she's like her mother and she's bad. And then she has to choose between being good and being loyal. Right? No child should have to do that. And most kids are going to choose being loyal over being good anyway. So I want you to think about this. She doesn't need to be nothing like her mother in order for her to make healthy choices. What she needs is to know what good stuff she got from her mom and then honor that, right? And then she can choose to live her life differently than her mother has. Okay, so in this case that I've challenged, first I validated her for her commitment and her level of sacrifice for her grandchild and her desire to see her grandchild grow up healthy. Then I've linked that desire into, this behavior I see you engaging in, this all or nothing, this doesn't square with your goal for her to grow up with a healthy self-concept. All right, so that's how you deliver a respectful challenge. The next step is the request, okay? A request, not a demand, not a statement. And when you make a requested behavior change, you're saying specifically what you'd like the person to do differently. You're asking them to do it. And preferably you're honoring the same quality you affirmed in the very first step. Okay, so hopefully the validation, the challenge, and the request all link in with one another. And so in this case, that might sound something like, so I'd like to ask you to help her connect to her positive memories of her mother and identify what good things she got from her mom. And then you can talk with her about making different choices than her mother made. And when you do this, you show how committed you are to her. You can see her mom's positive stuff even while you don't want her to repeat her mom's mistakes. Wow, that's hard to do, and that's so worthy of respect. Okay, so that's the request piece. When you're able to help the caregiver kind of see that their behavior is not squaring with their goals for the child, when you do it respectfully like this, then you set the stage to then be in a position to coach the caregiver to have the kind of conversations about identity, loyalty, legacy, and community that we talked about before. I hope that makes sense to you. Sherry and Leah, I can't, with the way that this is set up, I can't see what time it is right now. Can you give me a time check? Hello? Hello?
Kim, it's 1:55.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm not going to come back and revisit Meghan. I could actually write up what I did with Meghan to help her. But what I'd really like to do is answer questions that you all have about this material, and I can stay on the line after 2 o'clock if anyone is interested in hearing the next part of that story, or I could type it up, send it to Leah. Leah could send it to everybody else if you'd like me to. Okay?
Thank you, Kim. What we're actually going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of wrap-up on our end at Generations United and then invite everyone to stay on so that you can ask Kim some questions, since she is very generous in giving us a little bit more time on that. So thank you, Kim, and thank you all for joining us today. Before we end, I just wanted to share a few resources on Grandfamilies that we hope that you find helpful. I'm just going to quickly go through them here, but they will be posted on our website, as all these slides will be. On our website, there are resources and publications. There's also the grandfamlies.org, which is a website on Grandfamily State Law and Policy Research Center. There are fact sheets for every state as well as Washington, D.C. that are Grand Facts, and you can see the website address for those. There is a website up here for the AARP Foundation Benefits Quick Link, as well as the Center on Addiction and Family, where Kim works, and the Brookdale Foundation's Relatives as Parents program. So I really encourage you to explore these websites further when all this information is posted up on our website. Additionally, we encourage you to keep up with everything that's going on with Generations United, as well as with many other organizations. Many of you work for those organizations as well as other places, as we post as much information as we can that's going on in the network. So we have a weekly newsletter that goes out. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter, a YouTube channel, as well as I want you to save the dates for July 30th through August 2nd in 2013 for our next Generations United conference. We always have quite a few educational sessions on the topic of grandfamilies. So with that, I just invite you to visit the Generations United website at any time to get information on grandfamilies as well as other topics. Our PowerPoint, all the slides from today, as well as an audio recording, will be up on the website by early next week, so feel free to go and check that out. Once again, I want to thank you, Kim, for sharing your expertise with us today. And as you sign out, you will see a survey. Sherry requested that you just take a few minutes to fill that out. In addition to information in regards to this particular webinar, we are asking on that survey that you share any information that you have on grandfamilies housing. We're trying to collect a list of grandfamilies housing around the country. So if you do know of any, you could share it on the survey or pop me an email. That would be wonderful. So thank you all for joining us today. If you'd like to stay on the line, we will moderate some questions with Kim right now. So Kim, I have a first question for you. Someone asked to hear more about Meghan.
Okay, you'd like to know how I worked with Meghan? Because those slides, first of all, there are slides in the PowerPoint about how I worked with Meghan. So what I'm going to do, I just didn't, they were just really in this format. There wasn't time to get there today. So the good news is that you have those slides available to you already. And what I'll do now is I'm going to kind of give you a framework for how I worked and enrich those slides by talking about identity, loyalty, and legacy and how my interventions kind of line up with those pieces. All right. So the very first thing that I did with Meghan was I decided that I needed to be different from all the other helpers in her life. I needed to not try to convince her that her parents were screw-ups or convince her that she needed the protection of the system against them. What I needed to do was witness the good parts of her parents that no one else was validating. So I did stuff like I asked her to bring in music that reminded her of her family, and I could give you so many examples, but I'll give you one. She brought in the Guns N' Roses song, Sweet Child of Mine, and she told me about how she used to sit on her dad's lap and they would listen to that song. One of the other things that she was a fantastic dancer. Once I found out from her paternal grandmother that her father had been a star athlete in high school, which she never knew, I was able to really build on that information quite a bit to link together her father's prowess and her prowess. And she was also an excellent athlete and a gifted dancer. So we linked her parents' attributes with her strengths and talents, and then we provided her with outlets to develop those. So she ended up joining the STEP team at the church that her foster mother was in charge of running the STEP team, and she joined the STEP team at the church. She had dance lessons. She had a chance to join a performing arts group that was sponsored jointly between the foster care agency and her school. So she had a chance to develop those those strengths that we linked right back directly to her parents. This is a gift from your father. And we helped the caregivers and the caseworker understand her behavior within a loyalty framework. Wait a minute, hang on a second, go back just a sec. So the positive family memories, we did a lot of artwork. We made a scrapbook about things she remembered about her family. And of course, in the beginning, everything she put in there was all positive stuff. We put the songs in. That's an identity intervention, right? Who am I? Linking her parents' attributes with her strengths. That's an identity intervention. Okay, next piece, help caregivers and caseworker understand her behavior within a loyalty framework. You know what, actually, Sherry and Leah, were you able to turn control back over to me, and I'll go back to the slideshow and show these slides?
Sure.
Okay. Show my screen.
Okay, your slides are up.
There we go. So I'm on the third bullet now, helping caregivers and caseworker understand her behavior within a loyalty framework. So I actually labeled this stuff all as loyalty. I encouraged them to stop saying she's running away and started saying she's running toward. And then we started talking about, why is it that she felt the need to run toward? And so we began talking about loyalty, okay? And then we wanted to increase appropriate contact with her parents and her brothers. So I facilitated meetings, team meetings. We actually did it at the school. The school was extremely concerned about liability issues with her leaving school grounds without permission. They were really concerned they were going to get sued or they were going to be held responsible if something bad happened to her. She also had a supportive relationship with one of her teachers. So we started having meetings in the teacher's room. The principal came. I invited the CPS worker, the teacher, the grandmother, the aunt, the parents, the foster parent, all of us came together. It was circling the wagons. And we all signed a contract to help Meghan stop leaving without permission. Everybody there basically agreed to it. Now, her parents also did stuff to undermine that. It's not like her parents were all cooperative with it. They weren't. They were trying to look good to CPS by doing the right thing. But the point of bringing everyone together was to get this loyalty issue out on the table and to have all the adults talking with her about her safety and basically everybody saying we all want you to be healthy and safe. So we worked to increase appropriate contact, structured, safe, and overt contact. I urged the child protective worker not to further restrict visits between Meghan and her brothers. And at times when that had to happen, I encouraged them to allow more phone contact and more letter writing contact so that she could maintain those connections. And so that was an intervention that addressed identity and loyalty and also legacy, because everybody was talking about how we wanted things to work in the future. Okay? The more stuff that we finally, after long time working with her. It was close to a year before she disclosed to me memories of horrible, terrifying things that happened in her parents' home and abuse by her parents. She revealed her role as a sentry, and it's the protector of her mother and brother. She talked about how she would, when her dad would come home, she would have her brothers hiding, and she would position herself in upstairs in a way that she could see him when he first came in, and she could tell from looking at his eyes whether he was high or not. And if he was high, she would tell them, run back and tell them to stay in hiding. And if he was not high, then the coast was clear and they could all come down. Okay. She would also consistently get in between her parents when they were fighting and basically try to take the brunt of the physical abuse from her dad in order to protect her mother and her brothers. Okay, so when we talked about those things, that was, again, around identity and loyalty, just having a witness to those things. Once her role as the protector in the family was even that much more fleshed out, we began to talk more about age-appropriate family roles that she could take on now in order to act as a protector. And her foster family had been thinking about getting a pet dog, and she actually kind of became the caregiver for the dog in the family, which was an appropriate role for her to play. You know, it's appropriate for a child of her age to take care of an animal. It's not appropriate to expect her to take care of her siblings or her mother. But that links in with legacy, again, around, you know, how the family is going to function. And now we're talking about a you know, very complex family. Got the foster family involved as well. All right, and then the agency I worked for provided an outside expert. It was another therapist at the agency who was a substance abuse specialist. She came into a session that I had with Meghan to answer her questions about her parents' positive toxicity reports. Okay, we had to get special permission to disclose the results of her parents' drug testing to her, because confidentiality laws was preventing Child Protective from disclosing all of that stuff to Meghan. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. So we actually went through and got special permission, because there are exceptions to confidentiality around drug treatment when there are child abuse issues involved. So we used that, got permission, and then we brought in my colleague, who's a substance abuse specialist, and to let her ask every question she had about all the excuses her parents had made, and let her hear it from somebody else, not from me, not from the child protective worker, not from foster parent, not from another family member. And at that point, she had become more willing to listen to all the information about her parents that was available to her. So, you know, I couldn't have done that in the very beginning, but and that also allowed her to unload some, you know, angry feelings and basically direct that affect toward the outside expert instead of directing it toward the people who had become her helpers, or the people that she had attachment relationships with. Okay, and then it doesn't end there. At an even later point, Meghan really came around to embracing both sides of the information about her parents. She was now closer to 14 years old. She was really wanting to confront her parents about some of the choices they had made. And her parents kept on saying that they were going to, you know, they were going to take care of her, but they weren't doing any of the things that would have been necessary for them to do that. So, and at some point it became clear that the state was moving toward terminating parental rights. She really wanted a chance to confront her parents about the information that she had about them. And we had a session. I prepared her for a session with her parents where she asked some of these tough questions. And in one of these sessions, she asked her parents, if you lose us, meaning if the state terminates parental rights to me and my brothers, what will you do? And her mother said, we'd probably move out of state and then have a new baby and start over, which was devastating to her. But because we had prepared for this, and I had prepared everybody in her network for, you know, I don't know how this is going to go. It could, Lord knows what the parents could say or what Meghan's reactions are going to be. Let's talk through what might happen. We were prepared for this. And I had a series of debriefing sessions with Meghan and with her parents and with the other members of her support network around, you know, unpacking the things that her parents had said in this session. And then she began to really look at whether her expectations, her hopes for her parents were appropriate. And boy, did that unleash a huge well of rage and grief that she had about things that had happened in the past and about her prospects for a future with her parents. But it was happening now in the context of, you know, a stable support network who had stuck by her through, you know, all these changes. And she didn't have a smooth ride after this. I don't want to paint a rosy picture for her. She had, you know, she had another change of placement, but there was a container around her at this point, you know, and she was able to balance her loyalty, her love, her attachment, and her growing realistic understanding of what her parents were going to be able to offer her in the future. So there was all that coaching of the foster parents, the grandmother, the school to support Meghan through that entire process. And that's how we handled Meghan. Does anyone want to ask a question about that?